Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. It's Friday, May 9th. Starting to settle in a little bit to the IU basketball offseason. Still some news here and there. Had a commitment a couple weeks ago from Josh Harris and some recruiting news this week in terms of offers. But the roster getting pretty much set at this point. Could be a couple additions still to come. It's funny, I was looking back in the archives. Today's guest, Ryan Phillips of the Assembly Call and Sports Illustrated, was on the show exactly, I think it was 364 days ago to today. So we'll get to Ryan in just a second. But as always, this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink brought to you by our friends at Visit Bloomington. Just because the basketball season is over doesn't mean the fun stops. Spring is the perfect time to explore everything Bloomington has to offer. Hike the trails at Griffey Lake Nature Preserve, and then refuel with local flavors on tap at Upland Brewing Company. And don't forget about the many music festivals coming to Bloomington this spring. Whether you're into outdoor adventures, food, or just relaxing in a vibrant college town, Visit Bloomington's got you covered. Start planning your spring getaway now at visitbloomington.com. And I think it's right now is the perfect time to visit Bloomington because graduation's this weekend. All the moving trucks are moving out. There's going to be plenty of space to move around on Kirkwood and enjoy all the different things in Bloomington. Ryan, welcome back to the show. Before we get started, I need your go-to spots in Bloomington.
Well, I just had a revelation. Every time I come into town, the first place I go to dinner is Uptown Cafe. I love going to Upstairs, and I like Upland. So it's everything with an up in Bloomington apparently are my go-to spots. But yeah, I love getting a classic Nick's burger as well. But yeah, I mean, I brought my girlfriend for the first time this past year in February, and we hit everything, man. There's so many great spots, and it really is just so much fun going back and visiting the town. Probably like to the degree that like I didn't appreciate it when I lived there as much to now when I get back, because there's always, that row of spots I need to hit. So yeah, Uptown is always my first dinner though. I love that place.
So I mentioned it's been 364 days since you've been on the show. A lot has happened. I mean, if we having this conversation last year, there was a lot of excitement. I don't say we were excited, but there was a lot of excitement among the fan base as to what had happened in the portal, the roster that they assembled. We all know how that all played out. I don't want to rehash it again, but
please don't.
This now it kind of feels like, I don't want to say in the same spot, but there's a lot of optimism with a new era for IU basketball, this transfer portal haul. What have you made of just kind of this whole transition process since, was it March 18th, DeVries was hired, March 19th, he's introduced, and I think we had a run of 27 days in April with 10 commitments, which is crazy to think about. I was looking the other day. Indiana has the most transfer portal commitments of any Big Ten program, somewhat out of a necessity. But there was
Makes
other
sense.
programs, other programs with coaching changes too. But I'm just curious, like big picture, what you've made of this period and kind of where Indiana sits as of today.
Well, one thing I've really respected about the staff is there have not been many leaks. I mean, there's been kind of like they're optimistic about maybe landing this guy or something, but there hasn't been a lot of like, this is going to happen and then it happens. It's kind of with recruiting, with picking up new coaches. I mean, a lot of the assistant coaching searches were pretty behind the scenes. I mean, there was, you'd get a whisper about a name or two, but you didn't know who it was going to be, and then it would happen. And so I respect that they're really just going about their business. They're not trying to hype it, ahead of time. And with the recruiting stuff, you look at that roster and it night and day from what we've seen the last 4, even the last 8 years, this team's going to move. Like, this is going to be a very movement heavy roster. They are not going to be stationary on the perimeter with one post guy tossing it in and everybody moving around that. This is going to be a team that is cycling, that is moving, and it's going to be almost out of necessity because they don't have that back to the basket, classic back to the basket post presence. And so I think it's going to take a little getting used to for Indiana fans after the last, long stretch of basketball where we've seen that. But it's certainly a positive change in my opinion, because That's the classic thing on offense is move people, move the ball, and that's how you have success. And that's exactly what it looks like they're going to do. And then defensively, you look at some of these guys, and again, a lot of them are transitioning from lower level programs to Power 5, and there isn't a lot of Power 5 experience that is coming over in the transfer portal. But you look at their pedigrees, and these guys are a lot of like great on ball defenders. And are put a lot of pressure on the ball. And again, that's a necessity if you don't have a classic rim protector, a 7-footer at the back waiting to help you out. You got to put a lot of ball pressure on and make people uncomfortable. So I love the way this is worked, especially for a first year roster. It's maybe not the ideal roster in year 4 where you're trying to make a run for a national championship, but for a first year roster and establishing your culture and establishing what you want to do, and then seeing how his teams have played in the past, this fits. And I think it's going to be a brand of basketball. It's going to be really fun to watch and hopefully a successful brand of basketball as well. But I've really liked how the staff has gone about this. I feel like it's very workmanlike. It's not flashy. It is, we're going to get the guys we want to get, put them in a position, and we're not going to talk about it. We're just going to do it. And at the end, once we have our stuff together, we can talk to you about it. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of, hey, look at us. Like, look at the things we're doing. It's more just,
Right.
okay, done, let's move to the next one.
Yeah, I mean, from covering the whole this whole period in terms of a recruiting perspective, you make a good point in terms of the lack of information. It's not that there wasn't knowledge that certain guys were on campus or
Right.
visits were going to happen. There was a pretty strong feeling on certain guys, but it wasn't coming from the staff like maybe it was in the past. And that's no knock on the previous staff or previous staffs, but a lot of this stuff now is so agent driven with the portal. I think that's where a lot of it was coming from. But there was even an instance which kind of, I don't remember this ever happening. When Sam Alexis committed from Florida, I don't think anyone knew that was just kind of out of nowhere. There'd been mention of him, I think, by a couple people, but it was basically out of nowhere. I want to go back to something you said just about kind of these being lower level guys coming up a level. How much do you think that maybe limits the ceiling for what Indiana can do in year 1? Or do you think now in this era of player movement and, what we saw with some of the teams in the Final Four, I mean, Florida obviously had plenty of guys that moved up from the mid-major level. Maybe some of them were even lower major, but with this roster, do you think that puts kind of a cap on what Indiana is going to be able to accomplish next year? Because you look at it and you're right. I mean, Tucker DeVries played 8 games at the high major level last season. Alexis played at Florida. Depending on whether Luke Goody's back, I mean, he would obviously be a guy that would have high major experience. Other than that, it's a bunch of guys who are going to be. I would think the coaching staff wants these guys to come in and play with a chip on their shoulder and show they belong. But I'm just curious if you think it maybe limits the ceiling of this team based on just the talent level.
Well, more than anything, it's hard to project what they will look like. And I think that, when you have a guy going from, a Power 5 program to another Power 5 program, you can kind of, while it might be ACC to Big Ten, so it's not exactly the same, you can kind of see what they've done and kind of project. When you're going from a lower level to higher, you don't know what that's going to look like. Like Lamar Wilkerson, amazing 3-point shooter. Was he facing guys who were as athletic as he's going to face in the Big Ten? Probably not. So maybe those percentages drop. But but the one thing I will say about it and why I temper my, it limits the ceiling is that these guys all have a lot of experience playing college basketball. That's the other thing. They're not taking, it's not a lot of talent projection. It's these guys have produced. And I mean, you've got guys who like Connerway was the Sun Belt Player of the Year,
right.
and just because you haven't heard of him doesn't, like the average fan hasn't heard of him doesn't mean he hasn't had a successful.
I mean, he played Kentucky in the NCAA tournament last year, so it's not like he's never been on the court with those guys and performed, right? Wilkerson played at Assembly Hall last year, so.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I think that so it's not that these guys haven't had success, and I think that honestly in college basketball, for me over the last few years, if you look at the Final Four, if you look at the Elite Eight, it's a lot of experienced teams, and or at least teams that have leaders that are very experienced. And you saw that with Duke this year, that, in the Final Four, they blew that game because they had a bunch of super talented guys who'd never been in that situation before and just made mistakes. And I think that the emphasis in college basketball of getting veteran players who can lead is change. I mean, that's changing. That is something that people are realizing, that if you want to win a championship, you need those guys. And Indiana just got a ton of those guys. Now, again, you're right. They haven't done it at this level. We don't know what they're going to do once they're on the floor at Assembly Hall, and that is hard to project. So I do think it lowers the ceiling a little bit, but it's not necessarily a giant negative. I don't want that to be the message here, because I do think that these are guys who know how to play college basketball, who are veterans, who are going to be tough, and who are grown men in a lot of ways, as opposed to being 19-year-olds who are transferring from a lower level. But a lot of them put up big numbers, maybe not big, but like good numbers at the lower levels too. So they're at least going to do something when they come up to that height. So, I mean, Reed Bailey averaged like 18 points a game. I mean, you've got a lot of guys that were the best player on their team coming to Indiana. So that's what I find interesting about it. We don't know, but there's a lot of good in there.
Yeah, and they also, I think, did a good job later, maybe in the process of finding some guys that had multiple seasons of eligibility, because one thing that I worried about when it first started and after the first couple of commitments, it's like, do you really want to have to do this whole thing over again? I don't think you wanted, people ask me, shouldn't they go get some freshmen? I'm thinking a better sweet spot maybe in recruiting right now is to go find a guy who's played at North Florida for a couple of years and developed, and you at least have something to kind of put on paper and say, this guy did this, rather than going and reaching for a high school kid who maybe ranked 200. They could pan out, but they may not be able to help you next year. And I think Indiana was in a mode of, we got to find guys that can help right away next season, whether you're the 10th man or the 11th man. I think there's going to be scenarios where different guys are going to get chances to play, whether you have injuries and you don't necessarily know, as you said, what you're going to get out of every guy. So I do think they did a nice job of being able to mix in the experience, but also find guys like Josiah Miles, Jason Drake. There's a couple of Josh Harris. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple other names that have multiple seasons of eligibility
Josh
left.
Harris. Yeah. And then you got Sisley too. Yeah. And I think what's interesting to me, I do think they're going to take a big high school recruiting class in 2026, is that sort of telegraph I've gotten. So I think that you'll have, again, projected, depending, you'll have Miles, Drake, Dorn, Sisley, Harris.
Dorn's the other one I forgot.
Yeah, potentially coming back. And then you add a handful of freshmen, and then you can go get one or two transfer portal guys instead of doing this whole thing. But I do think that, I don't want to say there's pressure to win this year, but they need to start winning. And I think that that DeVries saw that, where the program has been and where he wants to take it. You got to win in year one to get people behind you and get the money behind you and get all those, and I think that it's a smart way they have constructed this roster. I mean, obviously it's smart if it works, but I do agree that getting some guys with that you can then carry over to the next year is very important, because you don't want to be doing 10 transfer portal guys every year. You just don't.
The coaches definitely don't want to do it.
I know. And that's not a recipe for long-term success. It isn't. I think that, there are times where you're going to have to do that because of bad fits, transfers. You get a lot of guys, maybe you have a successful season, guys go out early that you were expecting to come back or whatever. That's going to happen, but that can't be your yearly churn if you want to be a successful program. You've got to build culture and keep it intact.
So a bit of maybe a loaded question here, but I'll let you take the fire on this one, depending on which way you want to go with it. But what's your take on Luke Goody and apparently now Anthony Leal? There was a report that he's trying to get an extra year of eligibility. From an IU perspective, I know you look at this more of maybe through a fan lens than I do. What are your thoughts on those guys coming back? Do you think that's something that the fan base is going to welcome, that they should welcome, or how do you kind of approach that from looking at both of those players?
I'll start with Goody. I think that he deserves another year given the way that year played out. I know it's not exactly as you get in medical redshirt, where usually it's for a season-ending injury, but he played below the threshold of games. I think he should get that year back. And honestly, I'd be happy to have him back as a fan. Absolutely. And it's very clear from what I have been told that the coaching staff will be happy to have him back as well and let him know that. You know, if you want to come back, come back. The Anthony Leal thing, it kind of came out of nowhere, and I thought that was a done, and over. But honestly, given what Anthony Leal had to play through during his career, if I were him, I'd want to come back too and get like the bad taste out of my mouth of the way things ended. I know there has been some people in the fan base who think that, hey, dude, just move on, like, whatever. And there were some things said, where he maybe didn't endear himself to the fan base. But Anthony Leal always played incredibly hard for Indiana. He clearly loves Indiana. As somebody called, we've dealt with him a little bit from time to time, and he's a great kid. And you know what? He's a Bloomington kid. If he wants to play for Indiana and he can get the waiver, I would be all for it. And again, for how difficult his career has been, I understand why he'd want to come back and have a better season to finish things on. And so I support that if he wants to do it, as long as, there's that whole thing about revenue sharing and all of that, and how that's going to drag down everybody else's, potentially bring in less money and all of that. There's all those new things to be considered. And the projection, I think multiple people have reported they really wanted to have 13 roster guys. And with Leal, I believe it's going to be 14 if they both come back. So
that'd be right now they have 11. So
they have 11. Okay. So it would be 13.
13.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. I wasn't, at the last count, I wasn't sure. But so look, if it doesn't impact anybody else and they're going to be, you would assume Leal's not going to play very much with these guys because DeVries brought in his own guys. But if he wants to be there and provide some, leadership and, be there and have a better final season, good for him. Like if he can get it. And I also want to say, I don't think either of these guys would have pursued this without entering the transfer portal if DeVries wasn't okay with it. Like, so, I mean, they've clearly had those conversations, I would say. And so I don't know if people have a problem with it. I would say if they're doing it, the coaching staff likely doesn't have a problem with it and would likely welcome it as well.
Yeah, it's a little different.
It's complicated.
Some of the other ones that we've seen, because there was, I do this crazy thing in the spring, which I don't know why I do it every year, but I talk myself into it, where I track every transfer in the Big Ten, and I constantly update it. It's just a way that I like to keep track of the rosters and lets me kind of know who's coming and going. But towards the end of the window, there started to be all these guys that started to pop in the portal that I knew didn't have eligibility left. And there was a story, I think, in The Athletic, which I think is on the NewYorkTimes.com or whatever website now with their transition over to the Times. But there was a story about, I think there's over 100 guys who entered the portal that don't technically have eligibility left, which I don't necessarily love for the sake of, there has to be some kind of cutoff point, right? For all this, it can't just be stay in school for 6 or 7 years or 8 years. But there has to be some type of cutoff. I'm just curious what you think about, maybe not specifically to Leal and Goody, but do you agree that there needs to be some kind of rule set in place to where we can't have all these guys just in the portal that don't really technically have eligibility? It's just creating unnecessary chaos.
What we need is like an official guidance on what eligibility is. And I think that, the COVID year messed everything up, because then these guys were in for like 6 years because they had 6 to play 6 to play 5 essentially. And then, with medical red shirts, there's all these gray areas with it and things. I just think that the NCAA, and I realize the NCAA is their directives mean nothing now, but I just believe there needs to be something where everybody agrees to, okay, these are the parameters. Like junior college, we need to decide whether or not that counts or not. And
it doesn't. The court said it didn't count, so it doesn't count.
And okay,
now.
And if that's the case, that's the case. Once you step on college campus, you have 4 years to play, or 5 years to play for. And I guess it's 6 if you get a medical red shirt. But I just think that there needs to be some standard applied. And if you don't have eligibility left, you are no longer eligible for the transfer portal. Like that, you can't.
That's the thing I didn't understand, is why are these guys going in the portal if they don't have eligibility? But I think the bigger issue, I don't want to say issue I have with it, because obviously if there's a rule, if there's a loophole out there that you can exploit, go exploit it. But
Yeah,
I don't understand the lack of transparency in terms of how they're approving these waivers, because we're
agreed.
seeing these kind of like spill out on Twitter, like on a every day it's someone else, like someone was not going to get a waiver or someone's going to get a waiver. Like most of them are all getting stamped cleared at this point, because I think the NCAA realizes that they're not going to be able to win these arguments in court.
Yeah, I think the
But
NCAA is
it
just like, we don't want to deal with it. Like,
yeah,
you know.
it just doesn't seem like there, like you said, there's no rhyme or reason as to what gets approved and what doesn't. And I think when some of these guys, I'm not speaking to Leo and Goody, but some of the players at other schools saw that, you know, there's an opening here, that they probably realized, well, I'm not going to make, you know, several $100,000 going to play basketball maybe overseas. So why not try to go to another school for another year and maximize my earnings potential? I get that. I just think it's created an unnecessary situation. So the other thing, I just wanted to ask you about was just, you mentioned needing to win in year one. What is that? What do you think that looks like for Indiana fans to feel good about the direction of the program? Because we saw Mark Pope, and these are going to be the natural comparisons that everyone's going to have. We saw Mark Pope take over at Kentucky last year, go to the Sweet 16. We saw Pat Kelsey take over at Louisville, which is in far worse shape than Indiana
A
was in.
dumpster
I mean,
fire.
right. He goes to the tournament. You know, they run into Creighton, which was an unfortunate matchup for them, and got beat pretty bad, but they had a really strong year overall. But there's been other examples of coaches that maybe didn't start out as strong and kind of built things up gradually. I mean, Todd Golden, I think, kind of struggled
Yeah.
early on at Florida, but maybe not the best example because the portal wasn't as prominent then
Right.
as it was as is now. I'm just kind of curious. You know, you made an interesting comment. You got to win in year one to kind of build that momentum and get the money, get the fans behind you. What does that look like from your perspective?
Well, and I think that part of the reason I feel that way is because of Indiana has been basically downgraded as a program, and you've got to show where you're taking it. And not only to the fans and to the donors and people like that, but also to high school recruits that no, this is an option. Like, bring us back to being an option. We're going to do things that will make you better, and we're going to run the kind of offense you want to play in. We're going to feature you, like, look how we use these guys. I mean, that kind of stuff is very important for Indiana in the specific position Indiana's in, because Indiana is a program that has the fan support, it has the money, it has the facilities, it has everything you need, but it doesn't have the playing style that kids want to play in. That's been the problem. It doesn't have the coaching that the kids want to play in. It doesn't have all of these things. And also, kids that come to a school want to win. They want to win. They don't want to be on court in the middle of February getting blown out by 40. You know, I mean, nobody wants to be that. And so it's all of these things. They can make you better. They can feature you in an offense you want to play in, a defense you want to play in, and also you're going to win games. And so I think that part of that is at least showing we know how to do all of those things. Now, I do think for the fans, he needs to make the tournament in year one. And I think that, no, I mean, if you
I mean,
don't,
it's not really that high of a bar.
it's not. No, for year one, I'm setting the bar there, you know, and it's, if you're better than that, great. But like, you got to at least get in the tournament. We got to break this streak of not being in the tournament, or the pattern where you're in the tournament one year, out the next. Like, that needs to be the base standard for Indiana basketball, given the investment and given the fan support and given all of the tradition, all of those things. You need to be making the tournament every year. And so him getting in the first year needs to happen. He almost did it at West Virginia without two of his best players, you know, so you would think that you're able to do that in year one. And again, I'm not saying that's a high bar. I'm saying that's a low bar, and it needs to happen. And if you do it, I think you can reason that, hey, this has been a success. We got in the tournament. We're building from there. We've shown you what we can do. Now let us get all the players we want. Let us fully implement our system over multiple years and show you what we can do. I don't think he needs to compete for a Big Ten title in his first year on campus with 10 new players. You know, I just don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think that that's a reasonable expectation. But making the tournament is a reasonable expectation, and I think that he can do it.
I also think how you lose matters.
100%.
Like, I mean, how many post-game shows have you done in the last, I don't know, I mean, going back to Crean's last year, where you come on, it's a road game, you probably sit down to watch the game, and you knew going into the game that they weren't going to win, and then you come on the post-game show, they lost by 15 or 25 or whatever it was, and it's like, it's the same story over and over. I would just like to see more competitiveness in those types of situations. Like, give yourself a chance to compete every night. I realize you're not going to win every game, and you might have a game where you go out and get beat by 20. That happens to pretty much everybody at some
But
point.
it can't be the
But
norm.
don't have it be a pattern. Don't have it be every time you go on the road to Michigan, or every time you go on the road to Iowa, or every time you go to Nebraska. The expectation is, well, we're gonna go and play, but we're not gonna win. That, to me, that's kind of been the mentality of IU on the road for so long, and
Yeah.
I think that needs to change too. I mean, you have to be competitive night in and night out if you want to be a team that's going to make the tournament consistently.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's gonna have an off night or two. That happens, but like you're right. Knowing going in, okay, we're probably gonna lose this by 15 or more. Is not acceptable. And it's again with like saying it again.
I can tell you, Kentucky, Louisville, Michigan State, UConn, Florida, whoever, schools that are considered, blue blood, Kansas, they're not going on the road thinking that. But
No,
I think for a long time, Indiana fans have gotten that feeling because that's what they've watched, and they shouldn't
agreed.
have to watch
And
that.
they have no reason to not believe that, quite frankly. And I mean, there have been times where we've been doing the post-game show and we're giving the exact, I mean, we feel it. I'm sure the audience feels it. We're saying the exact same things every single time. It's just, I remember one time, I think it was during Archie's year, like we got to a point in the post-game show and it was clearly with like 4 straight games, we'd had the exact same complaints, and we're sitting there and we all just stopped talking. We're silent for about 30 seconds. I was like, does anyone want to talk about burritos or something else? Like, can we just get off this subject? Because I don't want to do this anymore. It's like quiet quitting on air.
I'd say it's also probably not a good idea to come out and lose your first home game by 21 points like Archie did. I think the things that kind of stick out to me is like it can't happen for DeVries. Like, don't lose your first game by 20 or whatever on your home court. Don't have these periods in the middle of Big Ten, like in January or February. It seems like
you lose
both of the where you lose 5 in a row, and it's like you can see it when the schedule comes out. It's like, this is going to be 5. No, you got to figure out a way to not lose 5 in a row.
Yeah, I mean, your basic job as a coach, figure out a way to not lose 5 in a row. I think that should be written into the contract. But I think that with DeVries, if you look at the way his team's played at Drake, and you look, I've gone back and watched a lot of that. I even watched West Virginia last year. West Virginia is interesting last year because a lot of people felt they should have been in the tournament despite not having Tucker DeVries, despite missing another top scorer. Like, that team fought hard. They played really hard and they were competitive all the time. And if you look at it, time at Drake, same thing. That was a dogfighting team. And I don't know what it's going to look like at Indiana. Obviously, you bring in different players, you have different style, you tweak your style. But I'll also say about the recruiting process for him, what we've seen from the transfer portal, he is very clearly taking a different tack, which is, I'm not going to recruit just talent. I'm recruiting a team. And he's getting guys that fit together. And that's the difference from what we have seen, where it's been like, just grab all the talent you can. It's more of an NBA mentality, which makes sense given Mike Woodson, his career as a coach. But grab all the talent you can, and then we'll make the pieces fit. Whereas this is, I'm recruiting specific fits. And I think that if you look at this team and the roster he's built, they fit together. You can see a bunch of different lineups where these guys can all play together in different styles, in different formats, and they can all shoot, which means they can probably all play off of each other as well. So I do think that that's a big mentality change that we haven't seen in a long time, is he is recruiting guys who fit together as opposed to just going down the transfer portal rankings and trying to grab the top guys. He's not, I mean, you bring in talent, but you bring in talent that also fits together and fits your system. That's as important as anything else. And then the next thing is you develop that talent. You develop that chemistry so that when they play together, it looks like they have played together.
Yeah, for sure. Last thing before we get you out of here, Ryan. A year ago when you were on the show, you were working for the Big Lead. Now you're over at Sports Illustrated. What, kind of a maybe sports media nerd question here. So maybe some of the listeners will tail off here, but what's that transition been like for you, and what's it been like working at Sports Illustrated?
Well, I mean, honestly, it was my dream job from when I was 10 years old. I was the kid who raced out to the mailbox to get Sports Illustrated. I wasn't like a really voracious reader, but Sports Illustrated I would devour front to back, every word. So, landing there was an absolute dream. The parent company, the Big Lead, wound up getting and I was at the Big Lead for 8 years, and the parent company wound up getting the rights to Sports Illustrated and transitioned us over there. And, you write for one place for so long, and then you move to another place. It's a different style of writing. There was a bit of I wouldn't say a rocky transition, but just an interesting kind of change to the way I was doing things. And so that's been, certainly challenging, but maybe a good challenge at this part of my career. But it's honestly, I can't complain about it. It's the place that I always wanted to work, and it's been, great behind the scenes. I feel like our company's really investing in Sports Illustrated, given what happened at their old place where there's a lot of bad stuff happening. They've really invested in the, in bringing people in and changing the way we're doing things and upping the editorial standards. So it's been absolutely rewarding so far. I got to, as a sports nerd, Alex, I got to cover my hometown team in the Major League Baseball playoffs at home last year. Like, that's just, sitting at Petco Park covering the Padres and Dodgers. It was, one of the coolest things I've ever done in my career. So getting to do stuff like that and have that Sports Illustrated, URL to write from, and having, Sports Illustrated on my resume is just a dream come true. So I'm loving every minute of it. And it's been, one of those things that you never think is going to happen, that it happens, and you're real happy once it does.
That's awesome, man. Happy for you. Happy that things are going
Thanks,
well
brother.
over there. Continue to follow along and listen to you on Assembly Call as well. Hopefully there won't be as many Ryan's rants in the future, right? You can maybe tone things down, right? If they're not getting, if there's not any blowout losses to talk about, then the rants maybe become a little bit more tame, right?
Yeah, we'll have to come up with another word for it, another R word.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and honestly, for the listeners, like, I am really excited about Indiana basketball and where this is headed for the first time in a long time. I really am. And I think that, this group has gone about it the right way. It's been a very short time, but I'm also excited to see some of these players, man. If you want to get excited about Indiana basketball, go watch the highlights of some of these guys. I think there are a lot of fighters that are going to be on this roster, and guys who've accomplished a lot and are going to be really fun to watch.
For sure. Well, Ryan, thanks again for coming on this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink. Thanks to everybody, as always, for listening to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars preferably, and also over at Spotify. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.